great thing is we've gone through an architectural discussion and we didn't talk about Kubernetes even once. Let's move on to business models. Phil, so clearly the natural evolution I would think of the as a service model would be outcome based. But we haven't seen too many of those outcome based models, right? Where's the hesitation? Do you think buyers are too cautious? Do you think vendors just don't know how to price it? Tell me your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think there's lots of factors in play here. I mean, I think one of the basic things, I was thinking about the struggles that SaaS vendors had in the early days because they didn't have the tools. Now, one of the tools they didn't have was subscription management software, which they had to build themselves, and they, it was really, really difficult back in the early 2000s to accommodate people changing their contract halfway through the year, because all of the systems that were built just on kind of a simple subscription model, and they didn't allow for all the complexity. And so it's only now really, and I still think this is evolving, but it's only now really that you've even got kind of reliable subscription management solutions that run at scale cost effectively, that allow you to move to more of an as a service model. And so, if the technology doesn't exist, how are you going to evolve the business models that go alongside of that? So I think this is still in a very early stage. And then on top of that, how do you measure the outcomes in a fair way? It's relatively easy if you've got the technology in place to measure what you're delivering and or what usage the customer is having. But agreeing, what is the value of that? There's a lot of complicated calculations that go into play there. I mean, I was talking about or writing about one example the other day, which is here in London. The company that provides the ticketing machines for London Transport is paid based on how available those machines are and how smoothly the whole process operates. And so, the customer has basically, Transport for London has basically said, okay, we want our customers to have a great experience, and therefore we're going to pay you for those particular measurements that we think equate to that customer experience. So, that requires a mindset change on the part of the end customer, mindset change on behalf of the service provider, and then you need to put all the contracts in place. And I think this is still early days in terms of working out, what works well, what is effective, and some of these things we don't even have the metrics to measure at the moment. So I think that will evolve, but it's going to be a very slow process. And the other thing is, I think customers hesitate sometimes because if they are going to be widely successful as a result of using this technology, do they really want to share 5% of that margin with their supplier? Wouldn't they rather keep it for themselves and just pay the supplier a fixed sum? So we'll see how it goes.
And let's not take for granted the payment system has been based upon a transaction fee that in essence is an outcome-based relationship, and that's been around forever. And whether it's using your credit card, or in today's world, more and more SaaS cloud-based vendors are figuring out an algorithm to get paid not only on a per month per user basis, but based upon the amount of transactions or the amount of traffic being pushed through their systems as well, from a supply side chain kind of thing, or supply chain kind of thing. So there are those kinds of mechanisms that are being experimented with, and some that we already take for granted.
But I was thinking, every once in a while you'll hear about Rolls-Royce sells uptime on an uptime basis.
Yep.
Michelin had tried tires on a mileage basis, right? So every once in a while, more and more auto insurance companies are looking at pay by the mile, right? So they're starting to be, but the technology world hasn't quite shown too many examples yet. But I understand what you're saying. The instrumentation is difficult. The systems aren't there. May take a while. Jeff, let's talk even traditional as a service. The promise was, we'll give you a multi-year contract, but you will deliver continuous improvement. And AWS did a great job, right? 60 price cuts over a while. They've stopped doing that. A few years ago, they stopped doing that. But the first few years, it was just amazing to see that them go down the curve. There's a SaaS vendor called Zoho that keeps bundling a bunch of applications as part of Zoho One. Keeps increasing. Prices don't increase, the number of applications keep increasing. But they seem like exceptions. Why aren't we seeing more continuous improvement in the cloud world?
Well, I think we are seeing continuous improvement in the cloud world. I think that's one reason why the old myth of as a service being like a leasing agreement when you buy your car was totally off the mark, because when you buy or when you lease a car, you take it off the lot and nothing really improves unless it's a Tesla. In this as a service world, you subscribe based upon whether it's an annual or multi-year agreement, and you hope, you don't even have to hope, you expect rather that the SaaS vendor, if they're following the best practices in the marketplace, are adding more features and functions every quarter. So I think that continuous improvement process is happening among the best companies in the industry. I also think that there's I don't know, maybe a myth about the multi-year agreements. I can remember early days, and this is probably or somewhere around 2008, 2009 timeframe, going on a little roadshow with Chris Cabrera from Exactly, and him telling me over drinks one night how he was already surprised. Here he was trying to sell the idea of as a service, pay as you go kinds of services. And he was surprised by corporate executives, mostly CFOs, who were saying they wanted to buy at that stage multi-year contracts or sign up for multi-year contracts. So they were locked in for the cost of that service in a way in which they had grown accustomed to being locked in to that vendor, in a previous generation. And in part it was, so they had a visibility into what the cost was going to be. Another part was they were making an investment in that young company and saying, if we make a commitment to you, we hope that we can help to influence you to continuously improve your services so that we can feel good about that investment over time. And I think there's been a lot of multi-year contracts signed by a lot of customers among a lot of different vendors for a long time. And it just hasn't got that much attention because it's kind of dull.
Yeah, can I add, because I think one of the factors in those early days why customers were insisting on multi-year contracts was simply because that was the way their budgets worked. That they were used to paying for the software completely upfront and then amortizing it over 3 years. And so they had a CapEx budget, but they didn't have an OpEx budget. So they basically wanted to buy SaaS out of their CapEx budget, and the way to do that was to buy it as 3 years upfront, single purchase. So again, it's an example of the old habits really restricting the options of the newcomers to operate in the way that really works best for them. On the other hand, it's very nice for a young startup to get 3 years money in advance because it's good for cash flow. So there were some good sides to that. But I think that if you are, and I would call it an ex-SaaS vendor, if you are digitally connected to your customer, as all the SaaS vendors obviously were, but increasingly in other industries today, you must use that digital connection to engage with your customer, to monitor how they're using the software or whatever the product is, and to continuously improve the outcomes that they're getting from that software now or product. If you do not do that, then you're not providing value, and ultimately you will lose out in a competitive market to other people. Now, people get locked into software as a service just as much as they got locked into client server, because it's not easy to rip out an HCM system and put in a different HCM system once you've implemented it. But there is still a market out there in which people need to operate in a competitive way and in which reputation matters. And so I think people who don't operate this model correctly and who don't lock into that continuous improvement and keep delivering it are not going to win in a competitive market.
And Phil, Vinnie, if I can just add on and come back to a previous question you asked.
Vinnie's just not going to get a word in edgeways in this call.
Phil, it's all about you and I anyways. You know?
I'm honored to have the opportunity to have two of you together talking away. That's okay.
So Vinnie, coming back to that question you had previously about where we may have been a little disappointed in the evolution over the past 25 years. I know, Phil, you and I have talked about this, and your previous comment just brought it to mind. You know, the SaaS companies, the good SaaS companies, are capturing all this data, like Phil said. And really, that data represents not only a powerful warehouse of insights for the vendor to better serve the customer, but also to provide a different kind of value to the customer in that if the vendor effectively and successfully aggregates that data, they can publish on an ongoing basis some very powerful benchmark statistics that can not only help the customer better utilize the application just from a day-to-day utility point of view, but use that data to better execute the function that that software provides. So let's say Salesforce, you know, can look at how end users are using its CRM system and provide benchmark statistics so that best of class companies are compared to those other companies who use the application. And those other companies can say, wow, you know, if I use the application more effectively based on these statistics and these metrics, I can do better in my own business. So that whole benchmarking opportunity, I think, has not even been addressed at this point. And part of it is a privacy issue and lots of other, you know, apprehensions, if you will. And part of it is that these companies have been too busy doing other things.
That has been a disappointment. You know, I remember talking to Zach Nelson when he was still in NetSuite 10 years ago. And he said, Vinnie, we could see in our composite data that a recession was coming in 2008, right? We could see accounts receivable going up and so on. And I said, why don't you start offering those insights? I don't think they could get past the privacy issues and so on. I've had Plex tell me same thing, right? They could, based on the configurations that they saw as people were implementing, they could use machine learning to actually create a configurator, right? Again, the same thing, because they didn't want to annoy the integrators. You know, that's part of their business. There have been a lot of hurdles to better use of that data.
I think people are starting to do that, Vinnie. I mean, Plex actually is now publishing a quarterly manufacturing activity index, which is based on its aggregate data. A lot of it is to do with persuading customers that there isn't a privacy drawback to allowing the data to be aggregated in this way. I mean, one example that is really good is what Cooper, led by Rob Bernstein, has been doing in the procurement space. They, right from the beginning, always got customers to sign up that they could aggregate the data. And they're really doing some powerful stuff now with, they call it community intelligence, where you know, you can, as a customer, you can give your users benchmarks as to you know, whether they're approving purchase requisitions in line with other people in the same industry, or whether they're kind of being a bit slow. And that encourages everyone to kind of speed up. And there are other ways that they use that data. So I think it's changing. We're seeing that more and more because people now appreciate that if you apply machine learning to large sets of data, you can get these benefits. And so the payback for sharing that data as a customer is becoming stronger over time.
Good to see. Phil, you popularized the concept of XaaS, everything as a service. So let's leave the technology sector and go into the other customer industries, right? Services are becoming a big source of revenue from every product company, right? In fact, in many cases, even greater than the product revenue itself. Share some examples of companies or industries that are doing it better than others, both. Let's start with Jeff, actually. Jeff, are you seeing some industries that are taking the as a service model and adapting it to their industries that have impressed you?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, and there are many, many of them. But I even go back to our own industry of technology and look at Microsoft. I used to buy Microsoft Outlook, in a packaged form for $250, and it would last me 4 or 5 years. Now I'm paying $15, $20, $25 a month, and I've been doing that for years. So I've bought that service on an ongoing basis because that's the way to get it done. And I think that as I look around, there's a company that we kind of alluded to before with Phil's comments about subscription management. There's a company called Zora who's done a wonderful job of thought leadership here, and they've come up with this terminology of usership versus ownership. And whether you're looking at Uber or Airbnb or a number of other kinds of shared economy kinds of models, the underlying point of those models has been that there is some kind of subscription or pay-as-you-go kind of mentality to them. And I think, again, that the pandemic has made everybody apprehensive about making too much of an investment in anything, whether it's a house, a car, an office building, or anything else. And I think this model is, as a result, going to be propelled to a new pervasiveness as a result of the experience of the past year.
How about you, Phil? You must have many, many examples of industries that are kind of, have taken the technology lead and applying it to their products and customers.
Yeah, it is definitely happening. I mean, I think it's happening successively in different industries because, I mean, it's, and to some extent we don't really notice it because it's not called as a service necessarily, but the music industry, effectively music, and the same is true of all entertainment now. I think movies, whatever, is increasingly being delivered as a service. You pay a subscription, you take out Netflix, Spotify, whatever it is, and you have your favorite music delivered as a service. And there's AI and benchmarking used also to help you discover new things that you're going to like that you didn't know about, thus enhancing the experience. I think we're seeing increasingly product businesses in various spheres turning to this type of service. I was reading the other day about a machine tools manufacturer that actually has switched to being paid based on uptime and output, rather than people buying the machine tools and installing them. So, I mean, I think it is in all kinds of industries, and I think you need to kind of look at it, not be boxed in terms of thinking, because to me, even retail, to some extent, has an as a service element to it, because people are looking for an experience there, an outcome, and they are prepared to sign up to businesses that will deliver that. The Amazon Prime account is a great example of that. You pay a subscription to Amazon, and as long as they continue to deliver the service that they are famous for, and continue to kind of add enhancements and offer perceived value, then you're happy to continue paying that. So I think it's probably more prevalent than we already realize. And I don't think it's going to go backwards, because, and the reason for that is because of this digital connection. It just makes it more viable as a way of doing business than ever was possible in a disconnected world. So, it may go away if the internet stops working, but until that moment, I think it's going to become more and more mainstream.
I think with the pushback comes in certain customer types who, Jeff, you make a good point. During the pandemic, people said, I don't want to own anything. There are still some people who say, I'd rather own it and maintain it on my own, right? And that's where the John Deeres of the world have seen some pushback, because they say, I'll only sell it to you as a service. You can't buy my tractor. And they've seen some pushback, so.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the expected lifespan of the asset, so to speak. It would be hard to sell me on a subscription car, because I keep my cars for a long time, just like they keep their tractors for a long time. So what you have to do is you have to sell at a different level of value. In the case of John Deere, of course, what they're trying to do is sell that farmer on agricultural data. driven by the aggregate experiences of others who have similar devices, if you will, tractors. And what John Deere is trying to do is become an information services company. In essence, more than a capital asset company. And I think a lot of other companies are thinking along the same lines about, how do I transform my business through this digital connection, continue to provide the basic functionality, but add a level of value to it that in fact creates more impetus for my customers to stay with me rather than someone else, when in fact, all of these things are becoming more commoditized.
I think it's about offering value, though. I mean, if John Deere is not being successful with the model, it's because the farmers, the customers are not seeing enough perceived value from switching to that model. And maybe that's because they're just trying to sell the same old tractors, just with services added on. I can feel a new acronym coming on here.
It's universal. I think it's some farmers would rather own and maintain.
Well, yes, I mean, I think the mindset and the culture changes at different paces in different industries, different communities, and so on. But also there are. I think it's kind of very difficult to deliver tractors as a service because it's and I think in kind of small businesses particularly, there's a willingness to actually kind of make ends meet and kind of to be able to do repairs when you want to is quite important. I mean, I think I've read about in the healthcare industry, there are medical equipment suppliers who are using DCMA, the copyright law, to prevent third parties from servicing their equipment, which has meant that there's hospital equipment lying idle because the hospitals don't have the budget to pay the exorbitant repair rates that the manufacturer requires. Now that is a total abuse of the XaaS model, and
they learned it from the technology sector, right? Third-party maintenance is a dirty word in our industry. It shouldn't be, but so everybody is learning from each other.
Yeah, and some of the learnings are probably not how we want them to go or how they should ideally go. And it's up to, this is why at the end of the day, you need to have a certain amount of regulation so that but hopefully regulation that doesn't kind of end up causing the worst result.
No, I also think that there's a disruptive quality here, Vinnie, if I could just interject real quick. 12 years ago, we all heard that the financial services industry would never move to the cloud. And then the financial crisis hit and they started moving to the cloud. We heard that the healthcare industry wouldn't move to the cloud. And then the pandemic hit. And now telemedicine is the norm. I just got a notice from my health provider about what policies and procedures they're going to continue to keep in place post-COVID. I don't want it to happen, but if something disruptive happened to the agriculture industry, a drought or something of that nature, and their equipment was sitting out on the fields for an extended period of time, they're going to say, why do I own this stuff? Maybe I should be buying or utilizing it as a service, on a pay-as-you-go basis. So I think disruptive forces have a lot to do with the adoption patterns that we've seen out there.
That's a great point, Jeff. Guys, this has been fantastic. So final word each. Summarize 25 years for me. Honestly, this is a huge honor to be listening to you two guys talk about 25 years. But final word each.
You want me to go first, Phil?
Well, it's not over yet. There's another 25 years of this to go.
Yeah. I'll say this.
I do want a final word for this one.
Well, yeah, I will say the same. That is that what we've seen over the past year is only going to accelerate and expand the movement to the cloud over the next 25 years. It is not, again, about what is it, why is it. It's all about where, when, and how. And for the most part, it's going to be the where is everywhere.
Phil, you don't have to wait another 25 years. You can get a final word in now.
Well, I thought that was my final word. I mean, okay, so my final word, but I would have said this 25 years ago. If you want to look at the future, ignore what the big guys are doing, look at what the small guys are doing.
Great point. Thank you so much, guys. This has been wonderful. And I will bring you back in 25 years.
I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a date, Vinnie.